Hello and welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I'm gonna talk about a fascinating short story by Jorge Luis Borges called The Aleph. Well, the Aleph is the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet, but it's more than just a letter. It's also a symbol of origin and infinity in religious and mathematical contexts. And in this story, the Aleph is a point in space that contains all points, where the entire universe can be seen simultaneously from every angle. Sounds mind-boggling, right? I'll start by give a quick summary of the plot, and then I'll share some of my interpretations. And if you have different takes on the story, feel free to share them in the comments. Well, the story opens with the death of Beatriz Vertelbo, a beautiful woman with whom the narrator Borges is infatuated. But obviously his love was unrequited while Beatriz was still alive, as he admits, "I knew that more than once my futile devotion had exasperated her. Now that she was dead, I could consecrate myself to her memory without hope, but also without humiliation." After Beatriz's death in 1922, Borges begins visiting her father and her cousin each year on her birthday, April the 30th. Each time he turns up a little later and stays a little longer, so eventually he's staying for dinner and manages to earn the trust of Beatriz's cousin, Carlos Argentino Denari. After one such dinner in 1941, Denari launches into an apologia for modern man. He argues that since modern life offers so many ways to experience the pleasure of the world without leaving home, travel has become unnecessary. Borges finds these ideas foolish, but suggests that Denari write them down. Denari says he has already been writing down his ideas and shows Borges a poem entitled The Earth. It's a very ambitious poem as it attempts to encapsulate the entire planet into verse. He reads Borges some passages and praises his own merits as a poet, but Borges finds them quite uninteresting, and he believes Denari has invested more effort in inventing reasons for accounting his poetry admirable than in the poetry itself. 2 weeks later, Borges receives a phone call from Denari, who asks him to meet at a salon of his landlords located next to his house. Denari says he plans to publish the first cantos of his poem. Borges fears that Denari wants him to write a foreword to his work, but instead, Denari asks him to use his influence to contact his fellow author Alvaro Melian Lafineur and request a foreword from him. Borges agrees, but on his way home, he decides not to carry out his commission. Borges becomes very anxious, fearing that Denari will call again and ask about the foreword. However, Denari never does. Months go by until one day in October when Denari finally calls, but it's not about the foreword. Denari complains that his landlords are planning to knock down his house in order to expand their salon. That sounds reason enough for concern, but Denari further explains that the real reason he is so upset is that he won't be able to finish his poem without his house, because in one corner of the cellar there is an Aleph. It is one of the points in space that contains all points. Borges is skeptical and says he'll be right there to see it. Then comes the most exhilarating part of the story. Lying in a corner of the dark basement, he sees the Aleph. But Borges then expressed the despair he feels in trying to use language to convey the experience of seeing the Aleph, because language is a system of symbols based on our past experiences, while Aleph is infinite. It is beyond the limits of our memory. It is impossible to fully enumerate even a fraction of infinity. And moreover, language is successive, while the Aleph is simultaneous. Therefore, it would be impossible to describe the Aleph as a whole through language. So instead, he lists some of the things he sees within the Aleph. The Aleph was probably 2 or 3 centimeters in diameter, but universal space was contained inside it, with no diminution in size. Each thing, the glass surface of a mirror, let us say, was infinite things,
because I could clearly see it from every point in the cosmos. I saw the populous sea, saw dawn and dusk, saw the multitudes of the Americas, saw a silvery spiderweb at the center of a black pyramid, saw a broken labyrinth. It is London. Saw endless eyes, all very close, studying themselves in me as though in a mirror. Saw all the mirrors on the planet, and none of them reflecting me. Saw in a rear courtyard on Gaia Solar the same tiles I've seen 20 years before in the entryway of the house in Fray Bentos. Saw dusters of grapes, snow, tobacco, veins of metal, water vapor, saw convex equatorial deserts and their every grain of sand. Saw a woman in Inverness whom I shall never forget. Saw her violent hair, her haughty body, saw a cancer in her breast. Saw a circle of dry soil within a sidewalk where there had once been a tree. Saw a country house in a drogie. Saw a copy of the first English translation of Pliny. Saw every letter of every page at once. As a boy, I would be astounded that the letters in a closed book didn't get all scrambled up together overnight. Saw simultaneous night and day. Saw a sunset in Garataro that seemed to reflect the color of a rose in Bengal.
Saw my bedroom with no one in it. Saw in a study in Alkmaar a globe of the terraqueous world placed between two mirrors that multiplied it endlessly. Saw horses with wind-whipped manes on a beach in the Caspian Sea at dawn. Saw the delicate bones of a hand. Saw the survivors of a battle sending postcards. Saw a tarot card in a shop window in Mirzapur. Saw the oblique shadows of ferns on the floor of a greenhouse. Saw tigers, pistons, bisons, tides and armies. Saw all the ants on earth. Saw the Persian astrolabe. Saw it in a desk drawer, and the handwriting made me tremble. Obscene, incredible, detailed letters that Beatrice had sent to Carlos Argentino. Saw a beloved monument in Chacarita. Saw the horrendous remains of what had once deliciously been Beatrice Vertelbo. Saw the circulation of my dark blood. Saw the coils and springs of love and the alterations of death. Saw the Aleph from everywhere at once. Saw the earth in the Aleph, and the Aleph once more in the earth, and the earth in the Aleph. Saw my face and my viscera, saw your face, and I felt dizzy, and I wept, because my eyes had seen that secret, hypothetical object whose name has been usurped by men, but which no man has ever truly looked upon, the inconceivable universe. Once Borges is back on the street, he notices that all the faces around him seem familiar. He fears that nothing on earth will ever surprise him again. But fortunately, after a few sleepless nights, forgetfulness begins to set in. In the postscript dated March 1st, 1943, the narrator notes that Daenerys' house was demolished and that his poem was eventually published, even winning second place in the National Prize for Literature. Borges then reflects on the Aleph he saw in Daenerys' basement and suggests it might have been a false Aleph, citing examples of other Alephs in history and literature. He also begins to question his own memory. He can no longer be sure if he truly saw the Aleph. He explains that our minds are permeable to forgetfulness. He is even distorting and losing the features of his beloved Beatrice through the tragic erosion of the years. So this ending part of the story really hit me hard because it makes me wonder, do we eventually forget even the most important people and moments in our lives? Because at the beginning, the narrator declares, "The universe may change, but I shall not." It sounds like a romantic promise from a man determined to keep his love alive in his memory, even after she's gone. Yet, as time passes, even his most cherished memories, including Beatrice's face, begin to blur and fade. But at the same time, the author seems to view the ability to forget as a kind of blessing because After seeing the Aleph in Daenerys' basement, the narrator Borges fears that he'll never again be surprised by anything on Earth because he has already seen infinity. Yet he adds, fortunately, after a few unsleeping nights, forgetfulness began to work in me again. So in this case, forgetting becomes a form of relief. It reminds me of another short story of Borges called Funes, His Memory, or also translated as Funes the Memorias, in which he explores the implications of having a perfect memory through the character Iranio Funes. After falling off a horse, Funes awakens with an inability to forget. He can remember everything he has ever seen in perfect detail. A mere glance at the wine glasses on the table reveals to him every grape that is pressed into the wine and all the stalks and tendrils from the vineyard. He remembers the shape of the clouds in the southern sky on the morning of April 30th, 1882, and can compare them with the veins in the marble binding of a book he has seen only once, or with the spray lifted by an oar on the Rio Negro on the eve of the Battle of the Quebracho. These details are so overwhelming that he has to confine himself in a dark room and can only sleep by imagining a part of town he has never visited. Despite his perfect memory, he's not really good at thinking because, according to Borges, to think is to ignore differences, to generalize, to abstract, while in Funes' world, there was nothing but particulars, and they were virtually immediate particulars. In a conversation with Willis Barnstone, Borges said he believed we need a blending of memory and oblivion, and he would call that imagination. Well, I think here Borges might have drawn inspiration from Hume's empiricist philosophy, because according to David Hume, there are two types of perceptions: impressions and ideas. Impressions are the direct, vivid experience we derive from our senses, such as seeing, hearing, or feeling something. Ideas, on the other hand, are derived from these impressions and are less vivid. This distinction arises because ideas come from our memories of impressions. When we form ideas, we often simplify, generalize, or forget certain details and rely on our imagination to fill in the gaps. Funes, however, has a perfect memory and can recall every single detail of his impressions. So this means he doesn't need to rely on imagination to fill in gaps or form generalizations. This inability to generalize or abstract concepts based on experiences is what makes Funes incapable of thinking in the usual way. He is trapped in the world of particular details. In the Aleph, however, even though the narrator Borges has witnessed infinity, he is, after all, a fallible human being whose mind is permeable to forgetfulness, and this very capacity to forget saves him from the tragic fate of Funes. Hume explains that when we experience strong emotions or vivid impressions, they leave a powerful impact on our memory. But over time, even the sharpest memories start to fade. As memories weaken, we begin to confuse them with things we imagined. We might think, I remember something happening, but I'm not entirely sure. Maybe it's just my imagination. I think this idea fits perfectly with Borges' experience in the Aleph, because right after seeing the Aleph, Borges feels overwhelmed by the vividness of what he saw. He even worries that nothing else in life will ever excite him again. But as time passes, the memory fades, and 2 years later, he's not even sure if he actually saw it or if it was just his imagination. So if oblivion is a gift that time offers us, then what exactly is time? After all, the concepts of memory and oblivion are inherently tied to the passage of time. This question recurs throughout Borges' works, and it seems he wasn't able to find an ultimate answer. In the Aleph, the narrator initially perceives time as a flow from the past to the present and into the future. On the morning Beatriz Vertelbo dies, he notices a new advertisement on the iron billboards of Plaza Constitucion and realizes that the vast universe was already growing away from her. I think here he's suggesting that we feel the passage of time through the changes around us. This coincides with Hume's perspective on time, which suggests that time is subjective and is shaped by our perceptions of change, whether it's through our aging or the constant transformation happening around us. But our protagonist is not just a passive observer of time. His experience of life is intertwined with the passage of time. He feels how time shapes his life, his perceptions, and his memories. In his essay, A New Refutation of Time, Borges wrote, "Time is the substance I am made of. Time is a river which sweeps me along, but I am the river. It is a tiger which destroys me, but I am the tiger. It's a fire which consumes me, but I am the fire." I think he seems to indicate that our very existence is shaped by the passage of time, yet at the same time, time is a subjective experience that relies on the presence of I, because without our consciousness, time loses its meaning and relevance. Time will ultimately devour us. But before that, we also consume time. Each moment we live is an act of engaging with time, savoring experiences, creating memories, and shaping our identities. And this idea is echoed in the epigraph to his essay, a quote from Daniel von Chepko, which translates as, "Before me there is no time, after me there will be none. With me it is born, with me it will die." But these views on time are just our subjective feelings as mortal beings. Is time truly an objective reality? Does it flow like Heraclitus River, or is it actually made up of countless frozen points? In his commentary on the Aleph, Borges writes, "What eternity is to time, the Aleph is to space. In eternity, all time, past, present, and future, coexists simultaneously. In the Aleph, the sum total of the spatial universe is to be found in a tiny shining sphere barely over an inch across." In philosophical terms, the notion that past, present, and future coexist simultaneously is often called eternalism. This idea is quite similar to the scientific concept of the block universe theory, which views the universe as a four-dimensional space where every moment exists alongside each other, much like points in space. And in this model, time doesn't flow. It's a fixed structure where every moment is equally real. I discussed this idea in more detail in a previous video on Borges' The Garden of Forking Paths, so you can check it out if you're interested. But here what I want to say is that when Borges refers to the infinite space the narrator witnesses in the Aleph, I believe he is referring to a four-dimensional space-time that actually encompasses all points in space and all moments in time. For instance, the narrator mentions seeing dawn and dusk, seeing simultaneous night and day, and before he is led to the basement to see the Aleph, the narrator tells him that within a very short while he will be able to begin a dialogue with all the images of Beatrice. So through the Aleph, you are able to perceive the images of different times all at once, as if they exist at different points in the universe simultaneously. Well, this vision of the universe might be difficult for us to accept because we live within the confines of the universe and our perspective is inherently limited. Only someone who stands outside the universe can truly see the whole picture. And for metaphysics, it is only God who can have this bird's eye view. Only God can observe all time and space all at once. In the Aleph, when the narrator Borges sees the Aleph, he seems to gain that godlike view himself. For instance, he mentions he sees all the mirrors on the planet, but none of them reflecting him. He also sees his bedroom with no one in it. He's apparently absent from the universe. He becomes the ultimate observer of everything. As he describes it, "My eyes have seen that secret, hypothetical object whose name has been usurped by man, but which no man has ever truly looked upon. the inconceivable universe. And here, by using the word inconceivable, he is suggesting that what he sees is beyond human comprehension, and that is why he finds it impossible to express it in language. He believes it is futile to convey an infinite, simultaneous experience through the limited sequential nature of language. And this might explain why Borges dismisses Daenerys' grandiose attempt to capture the entire universe in writing. So witless did these ideas strike me as being, so sweeping and pompous the way they were expressed, that I associated them immediately with literature. Well, in another of Borges' stories, The Writing of the God, a magus imprisoned in a pyramid also uncovers the secret of the universe. However, unlike Daenerys, he chooses not to speak of what he has discovered. He just lies in the darkness, allowing the days to forget him. And when asked about these characters in his stories, who seem to solve the riddles of the universe, Borges remarked that they cannot express their revelations because he, as the writer, cannot express it for them. He had to concoct something to account for their silence. Well, that's pretty much my take on this short story. Have you ever read it? And if so, I'd love to hear your interpretations as well. Feel free to share your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for watching. See you next time.